Because that's really also how you learn. And I think you kind of need to be a sponge and open yourself up to experiences. Well, look, if you take a design approach, here's what you can do. And most of the time they go, yeah, that's very nice, and just continue on with the conversation, because the reality is you're probably presenting it to a company that's not like Apple and that's not like Airbnb.
And welcome back to another episode here on the UXR Minds podcast, where we break down the UXR world. So really happy to record this next interview and conversation with Laura Baker. Now, Laura Baker is a managing director at Fearless, and she has over 14 years of experience in the UX field. So she has a lot of insight, she has a lot of takes, and she's straight to the point. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Laura. We go through her early years and how she ended up where she is now, so kind of her transition into UX or industrial design. So there's a few interesting discussions around that there, and she was just really kind and a great person to talk to. So I want to thank Laura for coming on. And also I want to thank all of you listeners for your continued support of the podcast. If you want to give a like if you're listening on YouTube, give it a like, subscribe. If you're following here on Spotify or Amazon or Apple, wherever you're listening to this podcast, make sure you hit a like, and also hit that notification bell so you get all of the notifications for the upcoming releases, because we have some big ones after this one. This one's a big one too, so I'm really happy to also get into this one. So sit back, enjoy, and let's get into today's episode. So it's a big privilege to have you here today with me.
Oh no, pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm glad we got here in the end.
Yeah, we managed to. There was a few logistical issues, ill health, kids, etc. before, but we managed to get here. And exactly. And you're not too well yourself, so I thank you for actually kind of being able to push through and come onto the podcast today. So yeah, obviously I introduced who you are, but I'm sure our listeners are, if they don't already know who you are in terms of your background, would be super happy to listen to that. So yeah, how did you get to where you are? What is your kind of backstory?
Yeah, of course. So I guess in this context, I'm a designer originally, somewhat chosen as a career out of enjoyment, I'd say, and somewhat, quite honestly, out of a lack of kind of seemingly viable other options at the time. Okay. In terms of what I do, so I guess the short history is that I was an industrial designer, moved into UX about 9 years ago or so, moved to service design and into leadership, and I've worked for the last kind of 9 years or so in agency and consulting roles, working across the UK, the US, and Asia. I guess bar the odd project here and there, my work's mostly focused on sort of leading and building design teams and project work within sort of large scale, highly complex organizations. And my role now is just looking after the Fearless, looking after the team, the client accounts, kind of projects, operations, everything really that comes with running the company in itself.
Yeah, I can imagine being a global design director has its things you need to look after. That's cool. Thanks for kind of explaining that background. You mentioned before, out of lack of viable options, you ended up doing what you do now. What do you mean by that? Was it something that you just had to do because it was just something that, I don't know, your career path leaned towards that, or? Yeah, because it doesn't seem like, from those words, it doesn't seem like you chose out of want. So I'm just interested.
I think there was an element of want to it, and I always enjoyed design. If I could take it back all the way to kind of school and secondary school, going through kind of GCSEs, A levels to through to a university choice, and the kind of subjects that I always enjoyed and kind of ended up with A levels, economics, maths, physics, and design and technology. So you can kind of see where my headspace was with a lot of those kind of subjects, right?
Absolutely.
And it was very much a kind of, what do I do at university? DT was always one of my favorite subjects of design and technology for people not in the UK and maybe not familiar with it.
Mm.
And that naturally led me to industrial design as kind of
Okay.
the next step when I kind of formalized it out of school and
Mm.
through to university and kind of into the professional world.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it was kind of a do I want to, I knew I wasn't going to do physics. It was kind of do I want
Mm.
to do maths? Do I want to do economics? And I've got to admit, I nearly dropped out. I went to Loughborough. I nearly dropped out in second year. I really
Okay.
was not enjoying it. Didn't like it. And the thing that stopped me from dropping out was what the hell would I do if I dropped out? I looked at maybe moving to
Yeah.
do
Okay.
economics. I looked at business. I looked at some other things. And it
Mm.
was very much like, I think I better just stick with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So it's
that's where the kind of
perseverance.
seemingly lack of other options kind of came out
Right.
of,
Okay.
because I was like, there's nothing else that I think is worth dropping out for at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for being honest about that as well, because I think sometimes when people do see, I don't know, for example, in your position now, you think, oh, like loved it from the get-go, like already knew what I wanted to do from way back. And it's nice to hear that kind of honesty that, look, at that time, I didn't see any viable options. Obviously, it's kind of you pivoted into UX, etc. So I suppose eventually you did. I imagine you ended up where now you're happy to be. But yeah, like I hated math, so that I wouldn't have even have started. So obviously
No,
we kind of
maths
do
is
slightly
always my
different
thing.
things, but
English was don't talk to me. Too much grey
okay.
space. I like things when they're
I
black and
loved
they're white.
English,
They're right or they're wrong. That makes sense to me.
so we,
But no, I think it's a really good point that you make in terms of. Sorry for interrupting you there, but
no, no, no.
I think there's something with designers where sometimes they feel like whether they need to say it or whether they actually feel like they need to have it, they talk about having this passion for design. Design is my
Yeah,
passion. And you see it in interviews and portfolios and all of this other stuff. And I look
yeah,
at that and I'm like, are you really passionate about it? Or do you feel
yeah.
like you need to say that you're passionate about it? Because if I'm honest, it's never been a passion, whether it's because I
Mm,
did like it's not something I would describe as a passion.
yeah.
And I think it's something that I'm kind of curious about, and it's brought me satisfaction and it's
Mm,
enabled me to live a great life and do what I like to do and work with some really great people and deliver some great work. But would I call it
mm,
a passion? No, like it's a job for me. And I
yeah,
think that's okay. And
yeah.
I think people have this need from all sorts of angles to find your passion and work in your passion and do all this stuff. And like, you don't need to. Just find something that
Yeah,
like pays your bills, you're happy with, that's going to enable you to
absolutely.
grow and learn and keep you interested.
Yeah.
And that's also okay. If you have a passion, wonderful, but it's not the be all and end all.
No, no, no. That's actually super true. And yeah, like they're kind of the cliche portfolio CV bios. Like, yeah, love design, passionate about it, always loved it since I was a kid. And yeah, like there will be some people that always wanted to be a designer naturally, or naturally gifted, or just naturally lean towards that. But I'm sure there's a huge like chunk of people that like, yeah, it's a job, it pays the bills well, so why wouldn't I? Like I have maybe a talent towards that as well, so why wouldn't I pursue it as a career, even if it's not your passion? Maybe your passion is something else that you do as a hobby. So yeah, thanks for kind of going into that into a bit more detail. So obviously this wasn't your passion, but you ended up doing it. What what was the connection or the I don't know when you switched
The
career into
journey.
UX? Yeah, how did that come
Yeah,
about?
so I worked in industrial for a little bit because I kind of thought to myself, right, I'm not particularly happy in a university environment, but let's go out and see what the
Mm,
big bad world is like, and maybe that will change things for me.
mm,
And it kind of did, and it kind of didn't. I didn't love it, and I didn't hate it. It
okay.
was kind of fine.
Yeah.
But I had this notion of UX in the back of my mind. I did a
Mm.
module in kind of final year on it, and I was saying to my mum, like, maybe I should try this thing. It's called UX, and she was like, "Well, I remember you doing it. Like, it's
Mm.
apps, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's apps, it's websites, it's that
The
kind of
old
digital stuff.
explaining it to your
It's
parents.
probably where, yeah, exactly, the apps and the websites." Um, so yeah, I was like, and my mum was like, well, I suppose it's kind of where things are heading, right? So why not try
Mm.
it out? It's probably so long story short, through someone I knew, went into this agency and they said, well, why do you want to do UX? And I sat there and said, I don't know. I don't know if I do want to do it, but I'm interested
Mm,
and I'd like to give it a go. Obviously, this was a while ago, and thankfully, times were a little bit easier in terms of getting
mm,
jobs and everything else. So I went in and said, I don't know if I want to do this, but I want to give it a go and I'm interested to learn. And I went in for 2 weeks. I ended up on a like just experience, ended up taking a
mm.
2 month internship with them and was there for probably just over 6 years in the end. So
Wow.
that was my kind of actually very kind of smooth journey in to a
Mm,
degree.
yeah.
Very fortunate in that sense to not have to go through hundreds of application processes and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff that people are dealing with right now. But
Mm. No, that's cool. That's cool. Was it you touched on it slightly, but was it something that I don't know gave you more satisfaction from what you were doing compared? Because obviously we've spoken about it in terms of it wasn't necessarily your passion, but was UX something that appealed to you more as a profession?
yeah, I think what I realized going into UX is, I mean, people talk about specialisms all the time, but I mean, the world of industrial design might be very different now. Obviously, it's
Mm,
been best part of 10 years since I've been close to it, like in that sense. But it was very much end to end.
mm,
And unless you specialized, for example, in something like CAD, computer aided, like where you actually do with a lot of the modeling,
yeah.
you pretty much worked across the whole thing. And I
Mm,
think not only like what were the bits that I've kind of, I think always been like I spoke about the maths and the physics, and kind of that's like problem solving, that
mm,
first half of it, the strategy, the UX, the research, that's always
yeah.
where I felt more comfortable. Even when I was
Okay.
doing industrial design, when we got to kind of the form and the color and all of that kind of stuff, the more
Mm,
visual element, that's where I never felt as comfortable.
okay.
And I think what I found with UX was that I could specialize in the stuff up front more so
Mm,
then I and leave the visual and leave the stuff that I wasn't as good at, as comfortable with to the people that really excelled.
yeah.
And I think that's why I found more of a home for myself
Yeah.
in UX and digital than I ever did in industrial design.
Okay, okay, so that's interesting. And in terms of your path, so did you enter as like an intern from, I can't remember what you mentioned before, so you
Yes.
entered as an intern, and was it just a linear growth path, so intern, junior, mid, senior, all the way up to director, well, obviously where you are now, or how was that path for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been somewhat linear. I think I've had some challenges along the way of kind of being in one place for a very long time and the leveling up that comes with that from a
Mm,
perception of internally, like you don't know what you don't know. And when you're in the same
yeah,
environment, you feel like you're excelling and you don't necessarily know how you are compared to the outside world.
yeah,
So I think there was a leveling thing for a while, but in terms of my progression, it was well in that agency initially, junior, mid, I actually think I kind of, from a title perspective, I actually think I skipped senior. I think I was doing the role of a senior as a
right,
mid for a long time and then
okay,
sort of skipped straight to a lead from what I remember. Could be wrong
mm,
there.
okay,
Um, Clearly my memory's going slightly, but it was linear in the sense of
oh,
responsibility.
yeah, yeah,
And I left there as a lead that was sort of semi moving into a leadership role within an account, but
mm,
still had that kind of lead level. And then, just to give you a bit of context, I left there and very consciously, having been there for 6 years, decided when I left that I wanted to contract for a while,
okay,
and very purposefully just took very short contracts. So I didn't take anything for more than 6 to 8 weeks.
okay,
And I spent sort of 8, 9 months or so, just going around different teams, different projects, different accounts,
okay,
very much just with the mindset of I want to learn and I want to experience as many different teams and
mm,
projects and environments and companies and ways of working as I possibly could because I've been in one place for so long.
yeah,
I wanted that kind of breadth. And then I contracted for about 8 months before I joined Fearless about just over 3 years ago now.
Okay. Okay. Like, what would you say were the biggest changes in your day-to-day role going from, I imagine you were in the house before, to contracting? And which do you prefer? Like, maybe just a personal thing.
Well, no, so I've never been in-house fully.
Ah, you've never been. Okay.
I've always been agency, and my in-house
Right.
experience
Okay.
has come through long consulting sprints. So I was in an
Okay.
account, for example, leading one of their business units for about 2 years or so. So
Okay.
I've been in an in-house context, but never
Mm,
directly in-house from an employed
right.
perspective.
Okay.
But I think that's intentional. I love, well, I say I love the pace of agency. Sometimes it drives me mad. I would like one day every now and again that would just go in the way that I expect it to go and not pivot 3 times in a day.
Yeah.
But I do, I love the pace of an agency. I love the variation.
Mm,
Um, and that is why I've stayed in this kind of world and this bubble for pretty much the whole time.
that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I've never worked in an agency per se, but yeah, I've worked in a startup environment, which probably pivots in the same way, at the same speed, but for different reasons. But yeah, it's nice every so often to have that day that goes as you imagined it to go.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. So throughout all of this journey, from obviously industrial design, not really being your passion, moving into UX to where you are now, what would you say were the biggest challenges for you? Maybe it could be like, I don't know, the transition into UX, or it could just be dealing with an agency environment, or anything. What was the biggest challenge that you face, and how did you overcome that?
Mm. I don't think coming, as I said, coming in wasn't a challenge. It
Mm,
was a very smooth kind of transition, and I was fortunate there. I think
mm,
there was a challenge for me in terms of, as I said, sort of that leveling up and understanding actually what my level is in a wider context of the bubble that I sat in.
yeah.
And I think you get that kind of bubble of like, well, I'm this because I'm doing this in an agency, and you have a bit of
Mm,
a reality check sometimes when someone new comes in or you leave and you get
yeah.
into the kind of the wider world, and it kind of pops your bubble a little bit and you go, okay, like I didn't know how much I didn't know, and there's a lot to learn here. And I've
Mm,
definitely experienced that before.
right.
Um, I'm just trying to think I mean, in terms of other challenges, I think the big one is always imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't met many people that have some have managed to avoid that
Yeah.
in some form or another. And that's
Mm,
always been a big one for me. Confidence
yeah.
from an appearance perspective, from an age perspective.
Mm,
And as a result, the kind of intent, like the innate experience perspective that kind of comes with that.
mm,
And that's particularly been from a leadership perspective. I didn't
yeah.
have that so much from an IC perspective. It never
Mm,
bothered me.
okay.
But it's something that I became a lot more conscious of moving into leadership.
Yeah, yeah. I always say with imposter syndrome, I wouldn't even say it's a syndrome. It's just something that every human has in some form, and I think it's a good thing to have it because it means you're conscious of your position, of your weaknesses, and that you realize that there is something to work on. If you don't have it, then I would say for me personally, there's something wrong. Like I may be getting a bit too, I don't know, confident in my position, and maybe you start to, I don't know, plateau in your progression, in your growth. I'm not saying if you've never had it, then then that's a bad thing. But just from my personal point of view, even if it's hard to have it, and it's something that maybe you struggle with, especially if maybe you're an introvert like myself, or you have other, I don't know, insecurities, it might be a bigger challenge to have that imposter syndrome. But yeah, so you were going to say something before. I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No, 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 not at
No,
all.
no.
I completely agree with that. I think, yeah, some people will say they've never felt it. Sometimes I wonder if it's true. Sometimes I
Mm,
wonder, to your point, if you're not feeling it, is it just because you're in a really safe space?
yeah,
And safe
yeah,
space is wonderful if it's an environment that's been created that means that you don't have fear of kind of failure and messing up because you have that psychological
yeah,
safety. And if that's you've got that, then that's absolutely incredible because there
yeah.
aren't many people that fully have
No,
that. but it could also be that it's because you're not challenging yourself and you're not
Mm,
progressing, and
yeah.
that could be someone's not challenging you or you're not
Mm,
challenging yourself. But if you
yeah.
feel so safe that you don't have it, it's
Mm,
probably there isn't a lot of pressure on you, and that's absolutely fine if you want to
yeah.
be
Yeah.
like that and you want to sit in that world. Then no, I'm not
Yeah.
anyone to
No, no,
push you
absolutely.
outside of that
Absolutely.
unless you're on a team, and then yeah.
Well, yeah, and I suppose it ties in with what you mentioned earlier. I did have a thought then. I probably have to pause this, but what did I want to tie it into? Um, oh yeah, yeah. I'll pause. And I suppose that ties in earlier with what you said about it just being a job. So if for you it's about, look, this is something that I just want to earn a wage. I don't want, it's not a passion of mine. So I suppose it kind of ties in with that about not having the imposter syndrome, being comfortable with where you are. Because for you, it's just, look, I'm happy with what I'm earning. I'm happy with my role. I don't want to progress or deepen my knowledge in this space. And that's absolutely okay. But yeah, I think I would say from the people I've spoken to, 85% of people suffer with this feeling of imposter syndrome or feeling that like their role or their position is above them and that they don't really fit there. So yeah, it is nice also to know that you're not alone if you are feeling that as well. Um, I just wanted to ask you as well from your perspective, because you've been in the industry for a while now. What are the biggest changes that you've seen from when maybe you first entered as an intern or you transitioned from industrial design to now as a global design director? What are the differences or the changes you've noticed in this field? Sorry to
That's a
put you
good
on the spot.
question. No, 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 that's absolutely fine. The first thing that, I mean, there's probably a lot. The first thing that came to my head is that's just titles and this
Yeah.
idea of kind of specialisms.
Mm,
Not to say that it wasn't there, but I feel like it's got a lot more extreme and a lot more ambiguous over the last few years. I
okay. Yeah.
remember the first time I heard someone called a product designer, and obviously coming from industrial design, I was like, what on earth are you talking about? Why are we talking about product design right now? Because
Yeah.
that's kind of what we were doing back then. Um, and so I was like, why are we talking about like industrial design right now? And they're like, no, no, like a
Mm,
digital product designer. And I was like, what? Okay.
mm.
Um, so I think there's been an evolution in terms of, I mean, there's always been this IA, there's been interaction design, it's gone into UX
Mm,
design, but it does feel that there's been a hell of a lot of ambiguity
mm.
over the last few
Yeah.
years, um, and I think there's just ambiguity as a whole of design. Like what makes a good designer? You'll get 10,000 different answers no matter who you
Yeah.
ask. What is this role versus that role? We can't
Mm.
even agree, like, what does a senior mean? It's different from one place to
Yeah.
another. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity and discrepancy within design and
Mm.
inside the discipline, and it's causing a lot more outside of it as well. And I think
Yeah.
that's part of the reason that we still have this kind of value issue is we know that we can add value, but we're not very good at talking about our value, and have there's some places it's not fully recognized, and the ROI of design and all of that kind of stuff. And yes, it's proven, but it's proven from a like, look at Apple, look at Airbnb, and it's kind of like one of those things that people like to
Yeah.
roll out slides and go
Mm.
to their companies and say, well, look, if you take a design approach, here's what you can
Yeah.
do. And most of the time they go, yeah, yeah, that's very nice, and just continue on with the conversation,
Mm.
because the reality is you're probably presenting it to a company that's not like Apple and it's not like
Yeah.
Airbnb, and what's yeah, they could have a goal, but actually it's not about kind of proving the ROI of design
Yeah.
in this kind of ambiguous form of something happening over there as a goal,
Mm.
but actually how do you do it in the context of where you are for the people that you're working with.
Mm.
And I think there's an element of a long way to go that we're
Yeah.
making progress.
Mm.
I think our progress might have been slightly halted by everything over the last 12 to 18 months, and I think
Yeah.
that is partly a symptom of us not doing a good enough job previously.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and the result of that. But improvement, but a way to go, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, I've come into the field later, so I've come in into that chaos, like in the middle of it. I think that was something that I struggled with, and I still struggle with sometimes in terms of titles and things, because there are so many, like yeah, like you mentioned, product designer. Now there's product strategist, a UX designer, UX strategist, UX writer, UX research, and there's so many different ones. And so I had to read so many articles, and then you read all these articles, and they all have like a different slant on what is a product designer. And so I just came to understand, like, look, once I work with these people, then I'll say, okay, you do that, and that's that. I don't even pay too much attention to the title they've been given because that's maybe how the organization wants to structure things. But when you actually view their day-to-day role, it gives you a better understanding of what that actually is and not really tying it to the title. That's what helped me anyway, too, because I got really confused, and especially as I was kind of learning what UX was, etc. I had a mentor, and he said, "Okay, you kind of get into this stage now in your development that if you want to specialize, it's kind of a good time because if you're going to specialize, you need to obviously focus on specific things." And that's when kind of the confusion started because I liked elements in different, let's say, titles
Yeah.
or roles, and it was hard to kind of say, okay, yeah, I fit perfectly into this box of, I don't know, UX researcher or UX writer, because I do actually like a bit of design or I like a bit of this. So that's always been kind of hard. And what advice would you have for someone who is starting now? Because I would say the majority of my listeners on the podcast are kind of entry level in terms of experience or are just thinking about they're interested in UX or interested in becoming a researcher or a designer. What advice would you give to someone who's kind of facing that situation now and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. What do I focus on? What do I study? Because if I start studying this and realize that's not really for me, have I gone too far down one path? And now I can't go into that field. So what would you suggest to someone there?
Yeah. Okay, so advice for kind of juniors, I'd say firstly, just be careful about going to companies where you're gonna, like, it sounds maybe counterintuitive, but you're gonna have too much responsibility too early on.
Hmm.
I'd say there's definitely times for that, but I think you
Yeah.
wanna spend your entire career developing and learning, and actually
Mm.
the best time to be the novice and to learn and to be able to do all of this stuff is right now. So you
Yeah.
need to find an environment that's going to be able to support you with that. So be cautious about the jobs that you go after. You want to go and you want to find somewhere that
Mm.
will really nurture a junior designer, and you need to be conscious in your interviews and go in with the right questions. So ask them what support there is day to day, what's going to be expected, what their history is with developing junior designers and career paths and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And as always, it's never all about what the company can do for you. I think maybe it's an old school attitude, but I think what will make juniors stand out these days is people that are willing to just jump in and roll their sleeves up, that have a hunger and a willingness
Mm.
to kind of step in where needed without expecting anything extra in return.
Yeah.
Because that's really also how you learn. And I think you
Yeah.
kind of need to be a sponge and open yourself up to experiences. So in
Mm.
terms of that question that you asked about, like, what path do I do? Now's the best time to be a generalist. Say
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, Always just saying yes is typically not the advice for designers. We think we're trying to get designers to not always be saying yes. But in this case, it's really just about kind of having different experiences and figuring out
Yeah.
both what you like and also what you're good at. And the best way of doing that is to not pigeon yourself
Mm.
too early on,
Yeah.
and really kind of get that breadth of experience wherever you
Mm.
can.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really good advice because it kind of ties in with the confusion that there is now in the field in terms of titles and different facets of the field itself. Because that people feel they need to pigeonhole themselves really early in their development because they have to specialize because if not they're going to get left behind. And I think it's a good point you make about it's a good time in your career to be a generalist because I think sometimes being titled a generalist or being given that title is kind of looked down upon. I've noticed just through speaking with people that if you are a generalist, you're kind of a jack of all trades, king of none sort of thing. And that can be viewed negatively. And I think there's a fear like, oh, if I'm viewed as a generalist, I'm not going to be hired because I don't specialize in a specific role.
Mm.
But I think, like you say, it's at that stage of your career, like if there is a role that maybe wasn't in your mind, I don't know, to be a product designer, and you get offered that role, just take it with two hands and learn everything you can in that role, and then you might end up becoming a writer one day or whatever you want to be. But it's good to learn. It's also good to learn those roles as well, because that can help you if you're working with someone who does that in the future. So that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think the other thing that I would just build on what you're saying there in terms of a generalist is from a company perspective. Like a lot of the time, I can speak for companies that I've been in, but and roles that I've hired for is when you're looking for a junior, you're looking for someone that can come in and you help them learn, but they're really playing a supportive role.
Mm,
And if you're more of a generalist, you can go across more areas and support more things. And that's really from a
yeah,
company perspective where value is like, actually, hey, we've got this thing over there we could really do with some support and an extra pair of hands.
yeah.
And that's going to help the company, but it's also going to help you grow. So that kind of breadth and generalist is actually probably more beneficial for you as well, but also for the company themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was kind of forced into that in my last role in this startup that I was hired as a UX research, but literally after like a week, the designer left. So I was like thrust into that, and then I was supporting product design, and then obviously involved in kind of supporting the engineers, and so like at the time I was like, oh, I just want to be a researcher, like this is what I enjoy. But then I started to view the benefits, like because you end up in meetings, you start being involved in various discussions that are not directly linked to my role at the time, the researcher. But I feel a lot more enriched coming out of that role, because now I can probably view other roles, and when I will be in situations in the future that I don't know, that I need to give a helping hand to a design or a product design or whatever, that I have that kind of experience under my belt in terms of, well, yeah, I've actually done this before, so I can help you here, and it just gives you more experience and gives you more kind of facets to you, which can always be beneficial. But cool, thank you for coming on, Laura. I almost said louder then. I'm in Italy, so
It's okay.
Laura louder sometimes.
It's all good. I'll
I
take that.
slip up.
Yeah, that's
But
cool.
yeah,
I spend quite a bit of time in Italy, so I will respond to
okay.
Laura quite happily.
There we go. Okay.
There you go.
But thank you, Laura, for coming on. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and like, really insightful as well, hearing about your journey and your honest feelings around your journey and your background as well. So thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure it will be highly beneficial for our listeners.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope someone got some value out of it or learned something or found something challenging. And if you didn't agree with me, let me know. I'm always happy to have a conversation. But yeah, thank you for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. Obviously, you'll be tagged in all of the promotional content. So if anyone does want to to challenge Laura, then you're happy to do so. Also in the comments. So no, I'm joking. Cool. Thank you.